Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this very, very special and timely lecture by Professor Yukiko Fukagawa. Considering the current Korea-Japan relation, I don't think this lecture can be more timely and special. I'm very sure you all are very much looking forward to sharing her insights and views on this very issue. So I don't think I will waste any more time. And with no further ado, I'd like to ask Chairman Chen to proceed with the lecture with Professor Fukagawa. Well, thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's again a great pleasure and privilege for us to have you at this special forum. We are exceptionally happy this morning because, as Dr. Sagong just mentioned before, this is a very special time for us, for our country, and its relationship with our neighbor Japan. We couldn't think of any better speaker at this stage to have a very insightful and forward-looking views, perspectives for the future of economic relationship between these two great countries. Just to say a few words about Professor Fukagawa's exceptional credentials. She is currently professor of political science and economics at Waseda University. Prior to joining Waseda, she taught at Aoyama Gakuin University and the University of Tokyo. She holds graduate degrees from Yale University as well as Waseda University. Professor Fukagawa has been also extensively engaged in advisory activities for the Japanese government, including the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economy and Industry, which will make her insight more useful for us this morning. With that, let's welcome Professor Fukagawa for her presentation for next about 30-40 minutes, to be followed by Q&As from the floor. Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Yukiko Fukagawa, and of course, I'm very much happy to be able to come back to this arena. And actually, since all the historical things have developed, I've been invited by a couple of seminars in here, but I only picked up this one because I'm familiar with these groups of people, and I love the quality of the audience. And also, this is a very nice opportunity for me to have a kind of alumni of my economic study about Korea. I've been very much learning from Dr. Yu Sagons and Chung Kwang-woo from various issues of the Korea's development experiences. So I'm really happy to be able to come back here finally. So since time is limited, maybe I should start quickly. What I'm really would like to stress today is that we really need totally new thinking about the Japan-Korea economic relations. And if we just taken up some very different ideas about the bilateral relationship, not only the bilateral one, but in a global context, probably there can be a certain nice exit we desperately try to find. So I don't know how it works, but that's my thinking. And I'll just try to mention about the famous book introduced by Bill Gates recently. The title is Factfulness. And because this situation now is, in my sense, has been very exaggerated and distorted by media and all the responses between the Japanese medias and Korean medias. So what we see now might be very different from what we would like to experience in the future. So that's the thing. And there are a couple of things that I wish to stress. So the book, I think it's already must be published in Korea also, but it's translated in Japan quickly, as in the case. And it's the title is Factfulness. And Bill Gates distributed this book to all the college graduates in his company, and that has promoted this book. And there's a very interesting things. The major message is, well, probably what we are looking, the world might be very distorted in various terms. So I think I highly recommend this book because that is exactly what we are experiencing between Japan and Korea. So there are 10 kind of things that the book was stressing. So the one is that there is a huge gap between what I am thinking and what the counterpart is thinking. So there's a huge gap. And in Japan and Korean case, well, from our point of view at least, Korea is getting more and more like to go back to the Confucian kind of moral kind of things. And Japan is getting more and more like a lawyer. So, and the compliance is such a big thing in Japanese society, more than the moral sometimes. So, and the compliance is the Japan's moral, and that's why we can have a very different kind of views. And the second one is negativity, and many people, this book tells us that many people have very much threatened ideas, and this is the worst case, and we are going to see the even worse development in the future, and that's a kind of negative bias that media tends to make. And also our thinking can be very straight line. In my experiences, there is a huge kind of combined kind of structural thinking between Japan and Korea. Well, from our sense, even now, Korea seems to maintain the ideas of catching up and rivaling with Japan, especially in the manufacturing kind of things. And the Japanese counterparts is looking at things as in the same way, but in a very different way. But in my sense, we are, the question is whether still hardware manufacturing is our advantage or not. And we are losing in various advantages in hardware manufacturing, especially China comes up. So how we are going to do next? So that might be the real issue, but still it's very much distorted. And the fourth one is fear. Everybody have some fear kind of paranoia kind of things. So try to avoid that, and that is called ostrich complex, that people try to hide away from all the scary scenario. So what we would like to, we want to see what we wish, and what we only hear what we wish. And the size, and of course, it's been very much exaggerated sometimes. And this discussion started with from our point of views, is strengthened export control procedures. But in Korea, it's wholly interpreted as an export control in volume terms, or even the export ban. But it's totally different, probably. And I don't think nothing such a serious things would happen. Otherwise, our producers is going to, exporters is going to see a lot of loss. And I hope that the Japanese government won't be that stupid in doing that. And I actually interviewed a couple of policymakers at Meiji, and they said if Korea follows all the procedures, even if they're excluded some so-called white list, but still nothing happens. Well, it may take time, and it may bother Korean global suppliers to be so much flexible about the demand, and that's the meaning. But in terms of quantity of the goods, if nothing happens, well, still the business will go on. So that's, I think, the Japan's positions. And it's been too much exaggerated, and I should say politicized too much. And people tend to generalize everything. And what I think very much the common generalizations is that Japan has been, I think the major message when we first announced these policies was we lost the trust on you. And that's the very important meeting for Japanese society, because we are very much based on the trust kind of relations still. So trust is everything. So in a Japanese society, even in a personal level, if you're sad, I lost your trust on you, and that's the end of the relations. So this is a very serious situation now. But in a Korean side, probably, especially Korean media has understood it as a kind of political revenge, because the timing was so good, and we had an election, and it's very much distorted by Japanese media too. So probably, well, trust is very difficult to see actually in these countries, but the political revenge is quite common. We see a whole big political revenge every 5 years or so in here. So that's a political revenge understanding has been very much distorting the issues. And also, we have some kind of destined kind of thing, or Japan is, Korea is, but we are living in a postmodern society, and still Japanese, there are huge Japanese supporters for Korean culture, like Hallyu, and people are still enjoying the travels in Japan. So the state level kind of issues is sometimes should be, I think, in my sense, should be separated from the diplomatic issues, and we tends to follow the very single perspective, and sometimes we have its own dogmatic ideas against Korea, and Korea has a chauvinism, and there we always blame each other very harshly. It's not our fault, it's not our responsibility. So Japanese government has been saying that we've been sending this message. The forced labor issues is a totally different issues from the comfort woman issue, textbook issues, and other whole things. So this is international law that your government committed, and we offer the compensations for the forced labor to your government, and your government declined. So that's sort of Japanese way of thinking. So, but Korea, I know that Korea has a different ideas on this. And there is always some kind of urgency that going to be expanded by media also. So Korea has some persecuted sufferers kind of emotions anyway, and Japan side has its own. So that's the development. So it's kind of populism that has expanded these issues. And one thing all the mature economies recently have is let's make our country great again. So it's not only Mr. Trump, but also France is doing the same thing. And Abenomics is typically this kind of logic. So mature economies are all just following the kind of politicizations as a kind of this populism. And probably emerging economies, on the other hand, have a certain ideas, let's change the world, because we've got powerful good enough, so why don't we change rewrite the whole history again? So that influenced politics by China, Russia, some other emerging economies. And the second thing is, well, recently it's the same thing. SNS got so powerful, and the role of media has changed totally. And Japanese media is suffering from business quite severely. So instead of confirming the facts and reporting, they started to be involved in more for the interpretations of everything. So that's why they tend to develop the stories instead of confirming the facts. So that's structural issues, and especially between Japan and Korea. And the other thing is we are aging very fast, and Japan has already aged good enough. And if we at least look at the Japanese media, especially like anti-Korea kind of journalists, they are typically old men in their late 70, I should say, in baby boomers generation who stationed in here in 1980s or so. So their memory has never changed that Korea is a catching up country, and we are competing with the hardware manufacturing, mass producing hardware goods. And because that was the time that they experienced their peak in their whole personal life. And Korea is also seemingly interested in these ideas. Still, we have to catch up and these kind of things. And so interestingly, so-called flying geese patterns, like Japan is leading and the other Asians are following, I think this kind of division of labors is already dead for many years ago. But still, peoples are very much controlled by this kind of ideas. And interestingly, again, those who write against something bad, critical, very much anti-Korean kind of medias, tends to be very interested in the financial crisis in Korea, the IMF crisis, and the chaotic things, and that sort of things. And the other topic that they really wish to see is Korea-US alliance is dead. And as Korea is more interested in North-South dialogue, and there's such a big groups of nationalists, U.S.-Korea alliance is very much getting weak, and the U.S. side is very skeptical, and even they are suffering from so-called Korea fatigue, and we are tired about Korea, this kind of thing. This is the story that they are constantly developed by the anti-Korean medias in Japan. And I know, as a friend of Korea, that things are very different. You had a Korean War, and the U.S. was a traditional alliance, and that's what we cannot know about the bilateral relationship against the U.S. So that's the sort of things. So anyway, the real issue is trust has collapsed, unfortunately. So when I was studying at Yale, Francis Fukuyama was a kind of star professor, and he was teaching in a political science. I could not take the course, but he classifies these major economies into two types, US, Japan, Germany, although we are totally different each other in terms of culture, but these groups are categorized into a high trust country. And things are, he tried to develop, this is very much influential in industrial organization, but like countries of China, Russia, France actually, and southern part of Italy, they are categorized into a low trust countries. And he develops the ideas that if you go to a low trust country, the industrial organizations are very much divided either by huge state enterprise or government controlled businesses and very minor and powerless small economies. But in a high trust countries, the industrial organizations is far balanced, and there's many middle class kind of players, and that's a difference. And I was very much impressed his argument because it was published just a year before Korea got the so-called IMF crisis, and the Korean chaebols made such a huge roles in it. So I don't know whether he's still following his logic, but at least in terms of values that Japanese society put on the ideas of trust, it can be something different. So when our policymakers said that trust is lost and that is the end of the relations, so I don't know how Korean government has taken it seriously. So that's the issues. And I'm not political scientist, I'm not journalist, I'm not government person, but in my whole long career, Korean economic policies has a kind of chicken game. So you always talk about chaebol issues, and then if you target that big business group, and then fair trade or the relationship with the small companies turns to be a big issue, and then the government has no way to promote the macroeconomies, trying to boost the big companies, and that's a sort of cycles. And the similar cycles is quite exist in Japan-Korea relationship too. So sometimes trade imbalance, I was rather very much surprised after this the friction started in Korean media saying, still screaming that we have accumulated trade balance against Japan since normalizations in such a big amount of money. And for economist point of view, it's nonsense. But still, it's amazing that Korea still is very much supporting this kind of ideas, at least. So then there's a trade imbalance issues, and there's import diversification programs that Korean government implemented for decades or so. And it was clearly, actually, it was very much targeted Japan. And in that sense, I think it was already against the WTO rules, but still you did it, and we accepted it. Because, well, the special relationship with Japan and Korea, etc. And then you have a so-called IMF crisis, and it's gone. And then there's an FTA policies, and well, as a result, at least, FTA is almost completed in Korean policies, excluding Japan from the FTA network. And Japan has its own responsibility to break down the Japan-Korea deal. But the ideas is quite similar. Let's try to exclude the influence coming from Japan. And so then there's a certain ideas, but still we are suffering from it. So then let's invite the Japanese manufacturers to localize the goods in here to as an import substitution process. And then the supply chain issues. And then we came back to exactly the same thinking again. So these are the development of the Japan-Korea economic arena. And but I would like to stress, since we politicize these things too much, we maybe ended up by losing even far more important things. There are so many inconvenient things that is happening in the global economies. The one is that there's a chance of, for the slow trade. That means the trade never grows as fast as it did in up until, well, probably I should say, until the Lehman Brothers shock. And the, of course, naturally, if the world GDP grows, the trade should lead. I mean, the trade used to lead the growth because trade expanded much faster than the GDP growth. But after the so-called Lehman Brothers shock, trade did not contribute to the global economic growth, and that's a structural change. And in my sense, in these situations, why Korea is still seemingly sticking to the ideas, the export-led growth success is a very big foundation, and that's true. But still, whether you can still go after this strategy, I don't know. I don't have any confidence. But Korea is still seemingly very much interested in these ideas. So how we can survive in such a slow trade environment is a far more important issues. And there should be a certain a background for it. Emerging economies have seen a lot of rising costs, like in China, and in major mature economies, so-called IoT kind of things has developed. So there's no reasons for the mature economies who had huge asset of foreign direct investment has no reasons to further increase the outward FDI for their network production, and that's a big change. And of course, some of the countries are suffering from the job issues for the people. We are even having a tough time in trying to get out from Britain because of the Brexit, and people are still calling for the Japanese car manufacturers for their job, but probably we won't be able to do it. So, but other thing is that this is a time of data, not the hardware manufacturing. So data is everything now. So even though we are far slower in responding to these situations, especially on B2C, business to customers kind of businesses, but Japanese B2B business is very much adapting into this ICT-led production technologies. So data is the most important thing. But the question is, there is no basic established rules in a WTO basis at all. So that has motivated the major mature economies like US, Japan, EU to get together to discuss the data rules. And I think Korea should be actively participated in it because your economic futures will be pretty much depending on this. But I don't know how you responded to these issues. I don't know. And the another issue is the data security. So you can do everything inside your country as a sovereignty, but when the data has to go across the border, you need some international rules, and that's the issues. So this shows this is a typical Japanese one, and this is the gap between this is the speed of trade growth, and this is the expected trade growth in response exactly to the GDP growth that extended from the experience in the past. So the gap is getting wider and wider. That means trade won't be able to lead the growth, and that's another issue. So another inconvenient fact, not only for Japan but for Korea, is that U.S.-China war probably will last long, unfortunately, and they may destroy even the WTO. So this is a very serious issue, and I just can't. Well, how many? Well, even if I tried hard, but still, I cannot produce a Thukydides in pronunciation exactly in English, but the Trump is there. So it's not only Trump. So even some other parties from Democrats in the U.S. will take over the president, but still the war will continue. So this is an inconvenient fact. And U.S. passed the special law for titles like Export Control Reform Act, ICRA, last year. And that has started some certain controls over the emerging technologies, microprocessors, advanced materials. And that requires even the ally to follow the rules. And this is not the speculations, but I'm not surprised if the METI guys have already consulted with the US counterparts in compliance with the rules. And the basic ideas about the US government, at least now, is to go against China 2025 to upgrade the industrial structures. So that's why the ECRA is introduced, and we have to comply these rules as an ally. And I do hope we have some more independent positions from the U.S., but that's Abe's positions. So this is something probably may do with this incident, because I know that Samsung and SKs are now making a huge plant in semiconductors in China. But if you are totally dependent on the materials in Japan, there should be a very high chance that the material can be re-exported to China. So why do we have to remain without doing anything at all? So that might be the chances that Korean media has never reported yet as a result of too much politicization. So how to deal with China is a big issue on us. And in that context, it's quite similar with the Huawei issues. So no Americans, no China expect their Japans to be in a similar way like in Korea, because we are clearly on the side of the US anyway. So, but still, we are trying to recover the good relationship with China, because it's such a huge, important market for us, of course, naturally. So that's a China impact might be another issues. And so Japan's stance is very clear. So we virtually banned the Huawei technology inside Japan. We just kicked out the Chinese manufacturers out of the government procurement at least. And we supporting the ideas of free and open Indo-Pacific strategies, which is called FOIP, and that's ideas to balance China power. And also we are leading the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and we are going to combine the Japan-US bilateral FTA, which is to be implemented in negotiation right now, and that is called TAG, Trade Agreements and Goods. But actually, TPP structures and TAG, Japan-US FTA, and the USMCA, US, Canada, Mexico pacts have fairly converged in terms of the contents and the characters. So in the meantime, there can be a chances that this bloc is going to be a kind of US kind of trade blocs anyway, in line with the security. So what's left? Where the Korea is heading to? We have no idea. So that's a message that is sent by the US. You have to show your flag, whether you are in our league or not. But I think Japan has a very similar situations, and everybody in Asia Pacific is desperately trying to not to choose these questions that we are a friend of both. We wish we could maintain all the supply chain that's stretched out, both China and the U.S., and that's very exactly the same dilemma for Japan too. But at least we have a very clear bottom line, while Korea seems to be very much vague on the decision-making process. And I'm personally sympathetic about the divided states in Korea, having a North Korea issues, and but still there can be something done. And so in terms of FTA, rule of origin is a very important issue. It's not that tariff anymore. Since TPP is such a high level of trade pact, tariff does not mean not such a big things, especially for the politicians. Always the agricultural issues is there from Japanese point of view, but tariff is one. Accumulations of rule of origin is the most powerful tools, and it's very important things. And also we have special rules about the data movement. We're trying to pressure China not to control their data inside them while they are freely mobilize their data that they collected from the rest of China. So it's a very unilateral kind of game one Chinese company, Didi, is operating in Japan, and they are constantly sending all the data. So how much customers that they are getting in Osaka or Tokyo areas, and they just analyze it every day in Shanghai headquarters. But we cannot do the same. Those Japanese companies operating in China. So it's a very unilateral relationship. And from China's perspective, your data is ours, but our data is ours. So why do we compete in these situations? It's a huge issue. So I don't know how Korea is going to respond to these issues. And finally, we have a huge crisis for the WTO regime. And Korean government has been emphasizing the whole diplomatic battle with Japan, but we should worry more is the collapse of the WTO itself. And it's a very well-known fact among the trade guys that WTO dispute settlement bodies is almost dead because of the constant oppositions from the US government. But if the DBS regime collapses, the trade-dependent small open economies are the very first economies that is going to suffer. So I think instead of having a battle against Japan, Korea should be in a best position to support the WTO. Otherwise, you're going to suffer. So, so in that context, since we hosted the G20 this year, US, Japan, EU government has been working hard to reform the WTO regime. And still the prospect is not so positive, but at least we are making effort. And we do wish that Korea could be the reliable discussing partner in this league. But unfortunately, very bad political relationship bothers Japan to invite Korea into this inner circle, and that's a tragedy. And so finally, we decided to pressure China that there should be transparent reporting obligation of what they are doing inside China, even though it's a sovereignty issues for China, but still we decided to do it. And if China breaks up because of the stress coming from the mature economies, the WTO is going to see a serious crisis. So that's the issue now. So what is the implications for Korea? First, my question is, are you still sticking to the export-led, hardware manufacturing-led growth or not? If you're so much excited about IoT or fourth industrial revolution, probably the emphasis should be on a different side. And another thing is still chaebols and SME issues. And I know that Korean government has invested heavily and also desperate about localizing the strategic materials for the semiconductors for 2 decades at least, but they never succeeded. Why? Because there's a serious lack of trust between the independent manufacturers and the large chaebol companies. So that's why the trust is very important, and that's the reasons why Japan has independent middle class big powers, but while the Koreans are not. And this is the issues that you'd better see very seriously. And another issues is, well, Korea has been proud that we are the leading countries of economic integration because we are totally dependent on trade, and that's true. And Japan should say thank you for Korea because we are very stimulated by Korean active integration efforts. But the question is whether bilateral FTA approach is suited for the Korea's economic growth strategies from now on. And we all know that Samsung, Hyundai's, and LG's, SK's, they're all supply chains are stretched out outside Korea. So what you're economically interested in seems to be quite similar, converged with the Japanese one, how we can cover up all the supply chain with the same rule of origin, so your division of labor across the border can be effectively protected. So, but that's the issues. But your government still seemingly interested in a bilateral one. I don't know what it is. And so digital issues and other things. And if you're interested, I know that Son Masayoshi visited here a couple of weeks ago, and he stressed artificial intelligence is everything, and it should be true. And I don't know if you're so serious about the AI-led kind of new growth based on the innovations and ventures. Domestic market should be regarded as a highly prospective experiment market, but I don't know how you do it while you're just postponing structural adjustment for the hugely debt household. So that's the situation Korea seems to face now. So, well, of course, I'm an economist, so I'm very much skeptical about the so-called income-led growth. If you make a success, and that's a congratulations for you. But at least economists have a deadlock kind of ideas, and it should be very difficult to continue. And question is how you survive in a U.S.-China game and the WTO collapse. And these are the issues that Korea should be more interested in. So if we only come back to the new thinking in a very larger context, not be a bilateral context, basically what we can do is very, there are so many things that we can cooperate and go together. And well, Japan and Korea is rival anyway, so we should be the very good counterparts in pressuring the government to be serious about the deregulation and innovation. So you can say that even Japan is doing, why don't we do it? And the Japan say, oh, even Korea is making success, why don't we do it? And this kind of pressures is a very positive one. And that should be done in a business environment competitions, and also like a case, connected autonomous shared electronic businesses, and this is a very important industry for us. So we should, why don't we compete each other, just stimulating each other, and that's a strategic issues. And also market integrations, we need some larger venture ecosystem, data-driven public services. And definitely we are aging so fast. We need some better biotechnologies and a healthcare system. And these are the common issues between us. And also, the other thing is risk management. I know there are many financial people here, but Korean media is also speculating maybe Japan is going to cut the credit line for the Korean big businesses. But I don't think in that way. Well, if Samsung and SKs and those guys continues to see their drops in credit ranking, there should be a certain economic logic. And the Japanese bank is totally independent from a government judgment, although there's a certain financial supervisory. So they have their own judgment. It's not fairly politicized kind of issues. So unless nothing happens to SK and Samsung performance, there is no chance for Japanese banks to cut the credit line. But the issue is, at least we are totally, yen is a totally convertible international currencies, while won is not. So that's why whenever Samsung and SK try to invest a huge project outside of Korea, they tend to rely on their finance from Japanese banks. And I think this is a market-based, quite a healthy complementary relationship, and it should be continued. And also, we have smaller number of human capital exchange. So we've got to appreciate the entrepreneurs coming from Korea and ventures, IT professionals, because we have a far smaller IT professionals, and it's a huge burdens if we are to compete against US or China. So these are the things. So my conclusions today, well, this only shows that how Japan is similar with Korea in terms of supply chain. This is domestic value added and gross export for US and China. And this is Taiwan, and this is Korea, and this is Japan. And we have fairly larger dependence on the US-China supply chain networks. And the difference is Japan is very much in good balance between China and the US, and Korea is more dependent on China. But their degrees is far larger, even compared to the EU 20 or even ASEAN countries or Thailand. So this is why we have to cooperate. So my conclusion today is, well, if only we can recover a certain level of trust each other, the potential is larger, and we have to expand our angles far broader than now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Fukagawa, for your brilliant speech this morning. Although we have only about 10 minutes or so, we'll be happy to extend that time if it's okay with you. But I'd like to have some questions from the floor. Professor.
Professor Fukagawa, nice to see you here, Korea, at this turbulent time. Well, I agree with many of your points, for the new paradigm shift. Well, let me focus on rather immediate issue between Korea and Japan. Now, first question, okay, straightforward. What do you think the Prime Minister Abe's next move after, removing Korea from the white list country? Do you think he'll continue to expand banning the export product to Korea and extend it to other areas, given the ongoing, the hard-nosed attitude from both sides? Seems to me there is no diplomatic solution at the immediate future. So I would like to hear, your views on this. And I know that you've been advising to Japanese government in designing the external trade policy as well as a Japanese policy toward South Korea. Second question, well, I do not quite agree with the South Korea Supreme Court verdict on the compensation issue on the forced labor. But right after the G20 meeting, Prime Minister Abe really championed, Japan will carry on a great flag to promote free and open trade regime. But at the following day, he announced, Japan will, impose a export control on the strategic material for Korea's semiconductor industry. This seems to me very contradictory, and I think this might tarnish Japanese image toward the entire world as the champion of the free trade. So, what is your view? Is there any possibility for Japan and Korea to separate diplomatic issues from the economic ties? I am really afraid that maybe South Korea and Japan may go into some, brinks of economic ties and so the partnership you elaborated this morning. Thank you.
Two parts.
As I said, I personally don't like or don't support Abe at all. So I'm not familiar with all the inner circle information. But it's true. Our government has discussed almost all the various issues to stress our unpleasant feeling against Korea diplomatically. So we talked about actually many things. Well, probably Korea has the largest number of illegal overstay people inside Japan. Even it's larger than Chinese. So maybe we'll be able to clean up those people because it's illegal anyway. So these kind of things. And also, but I should say the conclusion was that as far as we believe that we are under the rule of law, what we can do is very much limited. We are not like China. So we cannot pressure like a third instance. All the Chinese travelers should go back to China all of an instant. That things can never be able to do it. So just within the certain framework of compliance, what we can do. So I think there should be a fairly comprehensive packages. But what I should say, what we can do exactly is very much limited. And in terms of second things, I'm very much critical about bandwagoning Japan in terms of bringing in the security logic into the WTO logic. But this is actually security issues is a gentleman's agreement among the mature economies saying that let's blur these things because it's endless. So Trump's argument is that aluminum and steels coming from China is the threat for security. And we are very much, well, we are also involved, even though we are allied, we have such a high tariffs over our products. So we are very much criticizing these ideas, but finally we just ended up just bringing in exactly just doing the Trump's logic in some sense. So I'm very skeptical about these policies because that allows the more political interpretations and judgment to the licensing of the Japanese export to Korea. And it could be very much distorted in some sense. But so the Japanese government has constantly been saying that if the trust is recovers between us, and the one claim that is very much stressed by the METI guys is that we requested your governments to have a dialogue with your strategic items about where they are going to again and again. You've never responded. And I don't know whether it's true or just invented conspiracy theories by METI guys, but at least we can fairly say that the dialogues and all the communication between the government level was totally deteriorated in the last 2 decades. And we are very much lacking in trustful information. And that was a serious thing. So I think, I don't know how this Japan-US alliance in security logic is going to be kind of damaging things while we are desperately trying to support it. It's a very inconsistent kind of behavior of the Japanese policymakers, but we'll just see how it's going to develop.
Mr. Kim? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Fukagawa. You raised the great concern about WTO, its future. But in fact, from the very beginning, WTO was in trouble. At 1990, at the Uruguay ground, WTO was formed as an organization converted from GATT. I think WTO basically has a problem in the fact that it operates with the agreement by unanimity. And it's one thing when GATT operated with 26 countries, major nations, and dealing with commercial trades. Now, dealing with the 200 nations in WTO with very complex issues like intellectual property, etc. Magwadi once mentioned, the problem is that many of those countries cannot even read the items to be discussed. And to reach the unanimous agreement from that organization is impossible. What do you think we should do about replacing or reorganizing WTO? Thank you.
I think as economy very much dependent on trade, Korea should be active, of course, in supporting the WTO, because you're going to suffer most if the WTO breaks down. And you can sue Japan's or Japanese government into the WTO because it exists. But if it doesn't exist, what are you going to do? And how you're going to increase your influences alone, independently as a Republic of Korea? So that's the reasons many similar value countries tends to get together. Japan has been close to the EU these days because of Mr. Trump, but of course, nevertheless, we are quite an ally for the US. And what we can do is to have some loose formations of groups like TPP, as I said, UCMCA and TAG, to influence the WTO rulemaking or WTO build-up or reconstruction, I should say. So you have your option. You can go to China, but how dare you can do it? And we are trying to pressure China not to pressure the technology transfer in various terms. You've got to be also transparent about what you're doing inside China, and this kind of things seems to have quite a Korea's economic interest. So we do think it would benefit you to come to our league, but if you, again, so if you're tempted so much about the Chinese growth or Chinese way of doing, we cannot do it.
Okay, please, Mr. Kim.
I have three questions. First, trust is very important. And if we want to recover our trust, what should we do? Korea, from the Korean side and from the Japanese side. That's my first question. And the second question is, do you think the trust between our two countries will be fully recovered or not? And if your answer to my second question is, the trust between our two countries is not expected to be fully recovered as before, my third question is, what will be the future relationship between Korea and Japan? Thank you.
Well, that's all the difficult questions, and I think Japanese politicians should answer these questions. But I think as a democratic countries in Asia, we are different from China. We cannot control all what the peoples are thinking against ROK. So recovery of trust is not easy, but still we can talk. So instead of sending your whole people to US saying that, oh, Japan hit us, Japan teased us, well, instead you should directly talk to us. And Abe should accept that. Otherwise, there won't be no political negotiation at all. But also we have to have a kind of straight talks between Japan and ROK, saying that, well, Japan's side is very clear. What is your bottom line? What is your red line? How you can commit us? And that's the issues. So many people are supporting the ideas, saying that we should have a straight talks against ROK, saying that we said sorry again and again for decades, but nothing settled down. And also, we tried to make a diplomatic efforts to solve the, for instance, the comfort women issues, and we paid committed money to the fund, but the fund is all of a sudden dissolved and it's liquidated. So how we can how we can expect the policy consistency of ROK. We cannot. We are busy. We have to go Iran, probably. We have to deal with the WTO issues, many things. So we are not so much involved in the whole bilateral issues. So I think there should be a certain commitment, national consensus or commitment that this is the bottom line. This is where how we go. And many people may disagree, but still we have to go on. And that's basic things. And also in terms of trust, it's not my personal things, it's a whole general Japanese kind of sense, is that Japan is a very much forward-looking country. Why? Because we are constantly attacked by the big earthquake or tsunami, and we have to forget everything before that. So we are very much accustomed to this kind of ideas that the past is past, and we are going to change the things totally in the future. And that's why that's the secret of Japan-U.S. alliance. We are the enemy, and U.S. throw the 2 atomic bombs on us, but still we made an ally. So why don't we make the same things with ROK or China? And that's a typical kind of Japanese way of thinking. So you cannot satisfy the whole things if you change the conditions. If you say constantly saying you have to satisfy our emotion. Emotion is emotion, so we cannot do it. But still, instead, while building up the common future, just boosting the economic integrations or the wealth of the people in an aging society, well, after all, the dialogue constantly will be expanded. So we may understand Korea better, and Korea may understand Japan better, and that's the way of settle down the things. But it will take long, unfortunately. There's no overnight solutions for these complicated issues. And I think politics should take over these issues instead of bureaucracy in Japan. And there's no solutions for the bureaucracy.
Thank you. Perhaps one last question, if you have any question from... Okay, Mr. Shin. Yes, please.
Actually, pretty good to see some of your earlier comments that Mr. Abe was trying to bring up the data to the central stage of the tension from the World Economic Forum this year, and that's continued to the G20. So his political and then also economical agenda, perhaps emotional agenda in the name of the trust. Why really Mr. Abe is trying to really focus on to that when trade also there are a lot of tension building up between many countries right now. That's one question. And then the other question is that when the context is that WTO is almost dead, when the U.S. is sort of falling apart from the scene. So does that mean the China and the rest, is that sort of a worst stage in many other Western countries, if you were to see that, and then Japan is trying to really join the force on the other side, the rest? That's my second question.
I think a second question might be easier to answer. Japan is also in a very hard, it's in a hard time, just desperately trying to bridge between EU and the US because they are so spread it out. And the EU's all the strengthened controls over the data protections is very stressful for the United States. And they are just enjoying the whole booms. And so that's why we are somewhere in the middle between the EU and US. And but Japan, EU, the only thing that we can get together among the three parties is let's do something against China. And but still, EU has a different games with China, and Japan is its own, and US is in war with China. So their parties are also divided in terms of China. So China's point of view, of course, let's divide these three noisy parties and try to dominate the WTO rules, shaking hands with the other emerging economies, saying China never intervenes to you because we know what the developing countries are wishing to do. So let's change the world together with China, or this kind of things, probably. So I think ROK's position might be very complicated in this context, and you have to be very careful in every moment of the including whole the sequencing. And the first issues is very complicated again, but still I think we are one of the exceptional mature economies who's committed to the free trade because we desperately need it, and domestic market is quite dead. So and Abenomics is threatened by the deadline because we are very much doing abnormal kind of economic policies in Abenomics, and we never know. Even a textbook never teach us what we should do. We are experimenting the whole things. So Abe's one thing. Abe's is very much different, probably from the other policymakers in Korea, is that they are threatened by the market. And the especially equity market is quite an important index for Abe, and that's why he's very serious about integration. But actually, this is the only case that we use the economic card in the diplomatic context, I should say. So in that sense, well, I wished Korean side can understand at least Japan has a very threatened feeling to use this card. We have been very proud that we are not like China, but finally we are pressured to do quite a similar way of pressure, at least in terms of diplomacies, and we are very much regretting this kind of deeds. So that's why many good, well, not politically plagued or nationalistic, unless you're too much nationalistic. I think even, well, Abe himself, I don't know, but the surrounding educated people have some positive or thinking that we should do something again. But the issue is really the trust. So how we can recover the trust is everything.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps last question from Ms. Song. Yes.
Okay.
Hopefully very quick.
Yeah, quick one. In the midst of this U.S.-China trade war and also the Korea-Japan conflict, the global value chains that's been in operation in this area and also globally is, starting to break down. And against this backdrop, some people are saying that we need to resume the CJK, China, Japan, Korea trade negotiations. Now, first, how big a possibility do you see the resumption of the CJK negotiations? Second, if it's done and if it's concluded in some positive manner, what good impact do you think it will have to sort of minimize this negative effect?
I think we should wrap up RCEP, CJK plus ASEAN 10 members as quickly as we can. But China seems to be reluctant and India's is hopeless. So we don't know. But this is very serious things. And in terms of CJK, it's all Japan ROK relations is a big burdens on it. And well, even if we tried, well, actually China recently all of a sudden said that we wish to join the TPP. Oh, how dare you can do that? You cannot control your server. You cannot control your data. Data movement is totally committed in TPP. How dare you can do that? But China probably think if we are such a big market, we can change the TPP. But the thinking is very weird because TPP is originally architected to negotiate against China as a group. So if China joins, that collapses everything. So the chances might be very small. But CJK is important, of course. But as far as Japan, Korea is in this way, and another things between us is if ROK is really decided or wish to say that you wish to come to TPP, we may use our veto because you got okay from everybody. And that's a very important implications for TPP. But I think a kind of radical breakthrough to welcome ROK in TPP members might be a good solution. So it's a good opportunities to clean up everything. And you should be desperate about recovering the trust, and you don't really have to spend such a huge unnecessary time and money for localizations. Our producers might be happier, and your trade bargaining should be strengthened as a strong member of TPP. So, but it pretty much depends on the political situations.
Okay, thank you very much for your brilliant speech and a very helpful Q&A session. And you made a very exceptional efforts last night to come to Seoul. Took a very late flight for this early morning session. We do appreciate your support. And as you said, we hope the trust between two countries will be recovered very soon for mutual benefit down the road. Thank you once again
Thank you very much
coming
for
by.
inviting me.
Okay, thank you.